Firstly, thank you very much for coming. My name is Graham. I work in our production test team here at NI. The reason I wanted to put this panel together, I'll introduce with a story. I was in a large manufacturing facility in Europe a few weeks ago, and I was meeting with the LabVIEW team of developers there. There were about 18 people on the team, so a decent-sized group, and they were pretty despondent when we met them, because their organization had just decided to standardize on a test framework based upon Delphi that they had been using for a while. And as good LabVIEW people, they were like, well, we know our solution is better. We know our architecture is better. It's more sustainable. It's more modular. It's more modern. But we also realized a few things. That one, they weren't in the room when that decision was made. Two, they weren't sure how to get into the room where that decision was made. And if they had been in the room, they would have told the same story that they told us, which was the deep technicals of how this object-oriented framework in LabVIEW was technically superior to the Delphi one, which would not have swayed the decision in any way. And it made me think something that I've been thinking for a while, which is it doesn't necessarily matter if you're right or if your solution is technically better. If you're unable to explain or articulate the value of why it's better to someone who is not in your group, that could be higher up in the organization, or that could be to a peer, or that could be to a different function, but a stakeholder or a gatekeeper to the success of that project. Which got me thinking about, well, there are so many great sessions here that are technically looking at best practices of how to engineer better. Could we have a panel that describes not just how to engineer better, but how to explain what we're doing, the value of what we're doing in a more articulate fashion to get that sponsorship that we need. So I'm really pleased to bring together 4 people who I consider as great communicators and great engineers, and hopefully they'll share some of their experiences on how the tips and tricks they've learned over the years of how to effectively communicate the value of test engineering beyond their team. And I'd also invite, please, I'm going to invite the audience as well to come up with maybe some gotcha questions or some constructive questions that we can put to them. And if they're really gotchas, then we'll pass them back to you again. And we'll take some feedback from the audience. So maybe I should start. I'm going to I'll introduce from this side and go that way. And I'll frame it with a question for each of you. So I'll first introduce Bala from Whirlpool, leads the production test team there. And so from Bala's perspective, he's recently gone through a project where he pitched for a significant amount of funding from senior leadership to implement some digital transformation at his account. So maybe, Bala, please introduce yourself again, and then tell us from a communication side, what's one thing you learned from that concept of pitching to executives?
Yeah. Hello guys, thank you for the opportunity again. My name is Bala Varadarajan. I've been with Whirlpool for 18 years now. I've been mostly in the engineering area and interfaces with production, but not so much on a day-to-day basis. I'm basically in the development and R&E section of the organization. So one of the situations that happened in the recent past that he was mentioning was there was a new building that we're constructing. It's a huge investment, and it's happening after like 40, 50 years. So there was this situation where the building is there. They didn't kind of account for the labs. They were basically thinking they're going to move all the old equipments to the new building. They were like, they will fall apart when you move it. They didn't account for it. So we had to just go and pitch for money and get some funding allocated for us. But it was a huge challenge to do that because it wasn't the plan when they started with. So yeah, with more questions, maybe I'll answer some details on that.
That's perfect context, thank you. So I'll actually go across the other end now, so to Luis. So Luis has had a variety of roles, from Vallejo to EI Instruments that we've just heard from the keynote stage. now moving to a new job opportunity starting soon. But throughout that, from what I understand, you've been leading standardization efforts within your team. And so how do you evangelize, maybe introduce yourself again, and then how do you evangelize within your team or a best practice to lead that change?
Correct. Thanks, Graham. Thanks for the invitation here. So the challenge initially was standardized software and bring modularization and get the requirements straight away to production. But then validation and engineer, they were doing a great job bringing the right specs. But then when we're hitting production tests, was hitting a wall, like why it's not moving? And then helping them only through software was not enough. Then reassessing their hardware, okay, they need to have like standardizing hardware as well. So then we went like realign the hardware, the necessity for paying attention for instrumentation, then your software can be standardized and well maintained through the life cycle. So showing them the whole chain of instrumentation and test, the importance. We didn't create a bottleneck production anymore. We're not like blocking the production anymore. So we're a smooth process then. So that was the bottom line.
Perfect. So across to Michael, another one of our keynote celebrities from this morning. Michael, you've been in validation at Stryker for a long time. But you talked to me about how you've got to communicate the work of test engineering as well as up in the company across to your peers, maybe your mechanical engineering peers, who don't get involved with and don't want to get involved with the software of test engineering. Maybe introduce yourself and what's the context of that conversation?
Sure. Thank you again. Michael Trump from Stryker. When it comes to the story of what you're trying to communicate when you're trying to emphasize the importance of digitization and software, you got to have the context, but you also have to have the community around it to support it. And you got to start at your level. If you don't have everybody on board at your level, management's only going to see conflict, and management wants to see continuity at your level. So it's important that you make sure that you have a good context and you have a common voice when you're pitching things up to the thing. And when I find that there are issues and there's disagreements and stuff like this, I think it's important that at your level that you get with your team and you get with your members and you say, look, we might not all agree, but we need to have a common voice when we bring this up. And whatever that is, we got to figure that out here. Don't make that management's job to decide between us. That's never going to work, and that's not going to be good. So I think a common voice is the key.
Cool. Well, thank you. And last but not least, so Omid works here at NI, leading some of our R&D teams. Brings a different perspective because Omid, you have not only are you pitching or communicating the work of your engineering team to our company leadership, but there's a lot of engineering leaders who are pitching to you or explaining to you the work and the value of their specific teams. What do you look for in those, or maybe what's a lesson learned in when people come to you asking for these things?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. So my background is in software development, and I have software developers reporting to me. When they pitch to me, most of the time I can understand most of the technical details that they want to get into. But I shouldn't have to understand all the technical details to make the decision that I need to make. So one of the things that I always impress upon them is you got to up-level the conversation. And I think that's a challenge. And as a software developer myself and as an engineer myself, when I'm pitching things to my boss, I have to keep reminding myself that the point isn't for me to get that person to understand everything I know. How can I take the information that's in my head and put it in a way so they can easily make a decision? Ideally, the one that I want them to make, but still.
Perfect. Well, maybe I like that subject of up-leveling. Maybe for anyone in the group, if you've got a best practice of how do you go about up-leveling a test engineering story to present it in the currency of the person you're talking to?
Yeah, I think I can add to that. One of the struggles that I've went through is that when you have to up level, you have to abstract it so much that you miss a lot of details. But the value or the expense or the capital that is needed is for those details. So I go with some graphical aids, right? I mean, you can show some pictures. I take pictures, and then I sometimes I just set up the meeting in the lab. So the managers or the vice president, whomever has to take the decision, I'll invite them to the lab and I'll show and tell. That has helped in many situations where you don't have to go into details because you can show them, and it's much more easy for them to comprehend what they are trying to decide on. So.
I like that. Let's have a show of hands. Who's set up a meeting with maybe an executive leader in their lab? Keep your hand up if it changed that conversation. Okay. Positively?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. This is working. I like it. Michael, you look like you were about to say something on that.
No, I was just kind of parallel with that. You know, when you're going up and you have a problem and you're trying to get funding or whatever and stuff like this, I think it's also important to understand what the problem is of the person who's making the decision, because you're not their only problem. But if you can kill two birds with one stone and you can show how you funding them can actually help solve a problem that they have too, that goes leaps and bounds further along as well.
So how do you know what problem they're having, and how much research, or how do you discover the goals and the needs of those other people before you can pitch your own?
Yeah, so I think it connects to most of us try to introduce something new, but like, what's going to be the impact of this? What's going to be the value? So in my case, maintenance. Maintenance was critical. The technicians doing maintenance were doing maintenance in totally different machines all the time. They were creating small groups inside the group just to give maintenance to specialized machines. So we brought this idea, standardization, modularization, and this go beyond for training, for manuals they can read, and stuff on the internet. So some stuff are common, they could access as well. So it brings this whole pool of value, not like for your project, but the whole ecosystem. So it helps a lot.
Yeah, and I think there's some, obviously evergreen things like, hey, this is going to help us get to market faster. This is going to lower our costs. It's going to increase our efficiency so we can do more. Sometimes organizations also, the person that you're pitching to may have public goals. So you actually know how they're being evaluated. So you can tie what you're pitching to how they're being evaluated. And worst case scenario, just schedule a meeting before the actual meeting and just ask them, hey, I'm going to come pitch this to you. What's important to you? How can I tailor this that addresses your needs? That's just an easy way to get insight in what they're thinking.
I think one thing that has helped me is that when we were pitching automation, modularity, I don't think it was resonating well with them. I struggled with it a lot. But in the recent past, there has been the MBSC initiatives where they're talking about digital twins, digital thread, simulation, model correlation. All of those helped us. Now we tie the value to those. Before it was just basically, okay, you're going to get digitized reports. Okay, what do I do with that? Automated testing. They were standalone values. Now we connect them to the other organization and their initiatives and strategies. It has kind of amplified the value that we are creating. So that's another thing that has helped us.
Yeah, I think I did a course, many years ago I did a course on advocacy here at UT. And they talked about this concept of God words, which I've never forgotten. And they said, well, what are the God words in your company? What are the words that if you can tie your initiative to that word, which is maybe it's a trope used by your CEO, or maybe it's in your big company goals. Work that into the sentence of any project you're doing, and then that's the thing that will get it passed through. And so I always think when, at least from my side of when I'm trying to pitch these things, well, what are the God words at our company right now? Like what's on the minds of those executives? That definitely gets, now I'm not saying it's gonna give you just the thumbs up all the way through, but at least it often gets at least attention on the meeting, or attention on the email to set up that first meeting.
All right.
maybe a question for the panel, where are we starting from? So what is the perception, in your opinion, what is the perception of test engineering to other departments? And so what is the ground floor?
Yeah, we talked about this yesterday, and I think it's a good perspective to always have, is that when business leaders think about the business, they think about the positive and negative sides of the business. The positive sides being the income parts, the sales, the marketing, and the negative aspects of it as being R&D and all the other costs and so like that. So sometimes when we're in test, I always say it's probably a good idea just to, as a baseline, start yourself out as understanding that you're a double negative. And that's what I mean by that is that the R&D side is already considered a negative to the leadership. And then now you're an R&D and you're test for R&D. And from R&D's perspective, you're considered the negative aspect of their business and that they're trying to get something designed now. Oh, we got to test it too. Oh, okay, how can I get away with the least amount?
This is a room with test engineers.
Yes, I understand that. I understand that, but I'm just saying it's reality and perception are two different things sometimes, right? And you just have to, I think it helps to have that perspective from their point of view, that that's the way they see you. And they might not even consciously see you that way, but it's subconsciously. You know, it almost thinks, I always like to say, we're trying to be more than car insurance, right? You know, everybody needs car insurance, but you don't go out and find the best, most expensive, luxurious car insurance you can possibly get, right? You're trying to find the cheapest thing that can get you on the road and be affordable. Well, sometimes Teslas look like that. So you have to try to change the perspective of being car insurance to being a strategic asset. And that takes time, and that takes relationship building. And it takes support from mid-level managers and stuff like this. But if you know where you're starting, that helps you drive in the right direction.
So how do you do this? This is a question from me because he just took the microphone. But so if we want to go from a department and cost center, which is looking to be optimized, towards a valued function, which is looking to be invested in, what are the metrics, or how can we describe that value so that what do you think other teams are looking for at a test, or what is the value we can bring?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was some of the things we talked about. I mentioned earlier, testing is going to reduce potentially, return costs or potentially, depending on what industry, some fatality. And those are going to add up costs. I think tying it to what is the impact of not doing this work, I think is always a good thing to do. In terms of, again, mostly my experience is in software development and testing software. And as you're doing development, the value of test is kind of what Eric talked about. It's the first thing you can do before you even built the product that gives you insight about how that product is going to perform. And so, for example, addressing performance issues early on as you're building the architecture is a heck of a lot cheaper than doing it after you're, most of the way there. And so that is the value of test. Early testing will let you know, am I architecting this in the right way that's going to meet the requirements? So there's a lot of values. But again, it is putting it in terms of whoever you're pitching to, what are they going to care about? Because they're not going to care about, the quality of your test. They want to care about the outcome. Again, to your point, if we didn't have to test, we wouldn't. We don't test because we want to test. We're testing because we're trying to get some insights about the product. So sell the value of getting that insight through this activity.
Yeah, I think one thing we have done, my team has done, is that most of the time we start with, okay, here's the value, here's the additional benefit that you would get, but they think that there is always a choice. They could either choose or not choose that, right? But we started speaking about the negative side of it. Okay, what would be the impact if we don't do it? What are you going to lose? And then no one wants to lose anything when they are leading that team, right? So they don't want to be in a situation where people are going to complain. So we say, okay, if you don't do this, here's the time impact and here's your performance impact. Then kind of that in a way threatens them. So
there's a lot of studies of that of what you're willing to pay with what you're willing to give up. If I was to say to the panel now, how much would my wife and I do this a lot, how much would I have to pay you to take off all your clothes and run around the room? It would be a high number. But if I said, well, and it would be inappropriate as well, but it would also be a high number.
Let's get this straight.
But if I was to say, well, how much would you pay me not to have to do that? Generally, that's a lower number because you're more attached to your own money. And so I think there are three metrics that we can use here. There's the, which you can put a dollar value on. There's the opportunity, so the upside from doing it. There's the opportunity cost, and so the money that they won't make if they don't do it. And then there's the risk, cost of or risk, which is the money they will lose if they don't implement your situation. And I think a lot of proposals I see have one or two, but the more of those, if you can get all three of those and quantify that, it'll a much stronger argument. Maybe that brings on, we've talked about data. How do you balance the value of test from providing data compared to tying to more of an emotional or a human story? What's the balance you would advise?
I can use one of the Michael's line. That managers love dashboards. So if you provide good data, you can make nice dashboards. They can take centralized decisions. So it's our job actually not only test, pass, fail, and say quality is assured, but then give them insight. So from there, from my experience, dashboards actually is helping even the batch production and showing to the operators their rate and then how are they balanced or unbalanced compared to the neighbor cells they're producing. So it's actually bringing value. So the results, literally, you're measuring your products is bringing value to the end of the line and then showing the outcome. So in this case, yeah, data centralize a lot of their decisions as well.
Can there be too much data?
Yeah, compared to have none and have some, just with a little data actually, we had gathered, wow, so much decisions are being made, and they're able to squeeze more and from the cells and getting more rate. So just for a little data, so they can do a lot. Imagine even more later.
Yeah, I think the other thing is you want to always be showing improvement with your data. Management, like you said, they have performance reviews and they're looking at what they think. They need information. They need material information that says I'm doing better and my department is better because of this reason. So you're always trying to show an uptick, in whatever you're doing and stuff like this. And I think for us, one of the things that we show upticks for is in throughput. How much testing are we actually getting done? Automation helps us do more testing. And the other thing, well, what's after automation? And I said, well, we can't fix the space-time continuum, but we can digitize things and we can test a lot faster in a virtual world than we can in a physical world. So that's another reason to emphasize, the importance of how do we be better? Usually it's lower cost or faster rate. And I always usually lean on the faster rate, because we want the money to be able to do those things. And digitization is a huge part of that.
Yeah, maybe I didn't comment on this last night, but I may be one of those executives that maybe doesn't like dashboards as much, but I do see the value of them. So we, in terms of testing our software, I asked all the teams to create dashboards, and we actually have big TVs by the team areas where the dashboards are constantly updated, so the team can see the progress that they're making.
Sure.
And I think in order to, make me pay attention, they found out one of the things that I like, which happens to be cats. So as I was walking around, I noticed the team started putting kitten videos on the dashboards, and I would immediately be drawn to it. And so it was a way that they could communicate to me that, hey, we're improving the quality here. So
There's your emotion right there. That's your emotional aspect right there. Yes.
I think it was a lesson for me to learn that executives are people too.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe I should take a question. Any questions? You've now got to know our panel a little bit. Questions? What do you want from them?
How do you know how much testing is too much testing? I get pushback sometimes saying, we've done testing already. We don't need to retest the whole thing just because you made a new software release.
So the question that I'm going to repeat for the thing is how do you know what's too much testing? You get pushback because more testing would always be more quality, but at some point you've got to draw a line. There's got to be a compromise, if you like.
I think I think I can answer from appliance testing standpoint. We, if you see the coverage, we are almost like 30 to 25%. That's our coverage of testing with all the test cases, right? I mean, we're always in time pressure, and we don't do enough. And I don't think that applies to at least the appliance industry.
Yeah, for software tests, I think it's a matter of trade-off. So one of the things that is important when it comes to software tests is also figuring out what kind of test it is and when it's happening. So when it's tests that are going in as you're checking in code, the focus there is make sure it's really fast. And so yes, you can add more code, more tests in that at that point, but if it's slowing down the flow that the developers are in, you got to think about that. You got to make that trade-off. But then if you're doing full system tests, obviously that can take longer. But again, it kind of depends on the nature of the product that you've got and how much risk you're willing to take. I think there is such a thing as too much testing. I mean, if your test suite is always passing, you might want to take a look at it. We've actually done experiments where we try to cluster tests because our tests were just accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. And so we did some experiments where we tried to cluster tests and say, hey, when this test fails, these other ones almost always also fail. So that's an indication that maybe you can remove some of those tests. But that's data on your test, which is actually interesting too. There's a whole field of study on that. So.
The only thing I would add is that when we get into test, and usually they come with a very specific use case, they want to test something, you want to try to expand that as much as possible, especially with channel counts. They say, oh, I just need to measure these 2 things. And go, well, we'll measure these 20 things while we're doing that and make sure that we're looking for those ancillary things that could affect the test. And the more you do that, they get used to it, and you have the automated systems that can handle that. It's going to give you those insights that will basically get you to fail faster. So when you talk about, hey, how do you know not to test? Well, the problem is you haven't got to failure. You want to make it fail. You want to get to that failure point as quickly as possible. So, I mean, all the systems will fail eventually, right? You want to get to it as quickly as you can. If that's halt hash testing, if that's digitization, whatever that is, get to the failure point as fast as possible.
Okay, so we're straying into best practices of test rather than best practices of communication of test. So I'm going to challenge the panel and say, in this situation, someone is pushing back and say, you believe the level of testing should be here, and they believe the level of testing should be here. How do you justify bridging the gap? What's your go-to reason to justify why they should spend extra time and money to bridge that gap?
Yeah, in my case, having legacy testers and different generations, sometimes maintained only, they will not reassess the test they run, caused this reaction, and they were logging very poorly. We didn't realize one of the components were testing 3 times over the line, and it was taking some milliseconds, and it accumulates. So yeah, bridging the gap, collecting the data properly, making it standardized across the process help a lot. And I discovered this abnormal test behaviors like testing the same thing 3-4 times. So data answer the questions most of the time.
And I would just say, argue about the fact that you want to find out what your failing modes are. You want to know how it's going to break, because a lot of times they'll say, oh, we'll get to this certain point and say, hey, we made it, we're good, we can stop testing. Well, don't you want to know what's going to happen when it fails and when it fails, to know how long it's going to be? So I say just accelerate and fail faster.
I think I can add one metric. One of the things that we have seen in past projects is that, you do your best in the testing, you run hundreds of test cases, but you still have quality issues. We spend almost like 700 million per year on the quality issues, field failures. So if you're doing so much testing, why would you still have problem with it? There could be some portion of it attributed to components manufacturing, but there is design portion in it as well. So that could be one of my arguments.
I would agree. I think the best practice I've heard is, so I was in Philips in Bublingen, Germany. So they make hospital monitors. So very high quality medical, highly regulated devices. And I was surprised when I went into their test facility because they had everything. And I said, well, how do you maintain this? And he said, well, we're Philips, we're a medical company making life-saving devices. And anytime anyone says, well, are you sure you need that PXI extra module or that level or whatever, tie it back to the thing the company worries about most or fears the most, which is the life of a patient based upon the product they're selling. And if I was cynical, I would say the legal implications of the life of the patient. But the culture there was that the safety and the patient has to come first. And no senior manager was willing to stake the fact that there was a product recall or a problem with a patient because they pushed for a cost saving between this instrument and that instrument. They just weren't willing to make that. And so if you can position the funding argument around again, these sort of God words or a kind of a non-argument, then there is no comeback. And so that was their tactic, and it worked very well for them. And they've got a great test department. If you're ever in Germany, by the way, would recommend. Okay, another question out here. Otherwise, I've got some more written down. Yes?
So you mentioned test coverage earlier. How do you go about calculating test coverage? So in terms of like theoretical ways to do like PCBA when you're at like the electrical and mechanical assembly, how do you go about?
Okay, so the question is, how do you calculate test coverage, not at a PCBA level, but more at a functional test level of the device?
Yeah, I think.
And then how do you communicate that to someone who doesn't understand what test coverage is? I'll add that in.
I think I can give a simple example. I mean, there are hundreds of ways to do this. For example, if you can imagine a washing machine, you have your normal cycle, your heavy cycle, heavy soil. If you take those combinations and you do the 2 power n, all the permutations and combinations, if it is 1,000 test cases, we would do 100. I think we're not covering all of the combinations, permutations and combinations. We only pick the critical few to test because of the time. That's what I was going after with coverage, but there are a softer side. I think there's a much more detailed coverage calculation.
And would that be on like the design verification set of requirements? So I guess I'm focusing more on manufacturing tests. So how do you know if manufacturing tests what your coverage is?
So,
Maybe that's one for
That's something for you.
yeah, I think there's one example that I can say there as well. So if there are 5 product attributes that you want to measure in the end of the line, when we only do 3, because vibration measurement takes 4 minutes or 3 minutes, I think it can translate into your coverage, right? Because you're basically missing 30% of the failure mode you're not detecting because you're not doing a vibration test. And that could be contributing to 15% of your claims field problems. So it's you can calculate roughly all of these, but I don't think. But
I mean, I'll just comment briefly on software test. I mean, there are code coverage tools, and you can get a report of how much of the code that you have is covered by the test. Thing is, engineers are really good at gaming metrics like that. It's easy to write really poor tests that actually cover all the code that you've written, but don't actually test valuable things. So I'll say I've been up and down on code coverage. Right now, I'm pretty down on it, and we don't do it because I've seen it gamed. And some of it is not intentional. I'm going to game the system. If that's the only thing you're measuring, and the developer's writing the code and then the test, and they just know, hey, I got to make sure I do code coverage. That's the only thing I'm going to get evaluated on. You can write shallow tests, get code coverage, but not actually find the faults. So
Yeah, for us quickly, from validation, they kind of teach us almost 100% their test coverage, or 100% of all the case they cover in validation. So the engineers, design engineers, has such a confidence what component is most critical. They actually tell them production, and this back and forth needs to be smooth. So if you use the same tools, standardization across validation and production helps a lot. So you can reuse their test case in production. It helps tremendous, and you can focus on the key and the most critical ones. So that's how it helped us.
So one way of communicating or getting sponsorship for a large project is to do a pilot project first. This is pretty common. The challenge here is that I've seen, there's this phrase which I like, which I heard somewhere, but I will claim because I don't remember where, called pilot purgatory. It's when you get stuck doing pilot after pilot after pilot. And despite the fact that some of those pilots might have been successful, you still don't get sponsorship by your leadership to actually scale that into the organization. At which point you ask, well, why did you do the pilot in the first place? So my question to the panel is pilot or no pilot? And how do you use a pilot correctly to be able to drive change or communicate a need into your organization? It's for anyone. I know, Michael, you've got an opinion on pilot or no pilot. There you go. That's
I
good.
have a quick one on this. My manager said, like, okay, you can run a pilot, but you're not going to buy you time. If you're going to make a machine in production with a pilot system, you're going to support it. So, there's no phase 2 for them. So just go for it, be prepared, and then push for all the sales later. So pilot sometimes is for them seen as a waste of time. Be ready. So use the ready stuff. So off the shelf, use a lot, help a lot.
Yeah, I guess I can clarify a little bit of what I talked about last night in that I guess I have done a lot of pilots, but I never classified them as pilots. I always would go in saying, I know this can work. I know I can make this happen, and I will make it work. I will get it done. Not knowing for sure if that was the case, but knowing that we needed to start somewhere and we needed to start evaluating these things and stuff like this. So I would say, yeah, pilots are good, but I personally, within our culture in our specific company, I would never specify that this is a pilot, because usually pilots are reserved for the product itself. We're going to try a product, but at the test level, it's usually they want something that's going to be good and going to work.
Okay, that seemed conclusive. Okay, so my next thought, maybe start with Amina, this one. We talked earlier about metrics, and we said, okay, great, time and money. If this whole panel was coming to you and they all came to you with a different proposal, and they all say it would save you time and money, and they had their dashboards, because some managers love dashboards. At the moment, then they all look the same, right? Because they're all going to save you time and money. So what do great engineering communicators do to differentiate their product beyond what I would describe as the classic metrics?
Okay.
Maybe I was picked on you.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I do think, you said great communicators. I do think telling the story is helpful. It makes it real. That just resonates with people no matter what you're trying to get them to do. Beyond that, I do think if you've addressed, if they all, on the primary metrics of time to market, cost, they all look good. There are secondary metrics. For me, in terms of product development, it's oftentimes not the cost to build the product the first time, it's to maintain it for the 10, 15 years that it's going to be in market, maybe longer. So it's ongoing maintenance costs, I think, is an important one for me. And then if you think about, especially again with products that evolve, is the architecture such that it can be an evolutionary architecture that you can incorporate new technologies in as time goes on. So there are secondary metrics beyond just the basic cost, efficiency, time to market. That's what I would be looking for. How readily can you find developers who can work on this? The example you gave right at the beginning, I didn't even know people still did things with Delphi, but that company is a very large company, and it may be that they have a ton of Delphi developers, and that may have been an important factor in the decision process. So, I don't know, anybody else?
I guess the thing that I would always say is, said it before, is know what their problem is, and make sure you're solving their problem. And you talked about story, and there's a great papers and words about story brand and using a story. And one of the things you want to do is you want to make the decision maker, the person making things, you want to make them the hero of the story, and you're just the guide. You're not coming in as the hero and I'm going to do all this and save the company money. You're going to say you're going to save the company money and I'm going to help help you do that. And I think if you just spin it a little bit that way more and show that they're really doing the things and you're just there to help things along, to make it happen, I think that can be very powerful. Look at the smile, see that? See how that worked? There it was.
Yeah, Michael.
So,
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, I think I can add one more thing along the line of what I replied before, right? So if you see your adjacent functions like the MBSC, digital twin, digital transformation, all of these initiatives, if you tie to their goals and say, okay, this V&V digitization is going to help them, I think they will support you. And then the VP is going to be a common VP, and it might easily be a win-win situation for both of us, right?
So the last 2 minutes, we've talked a lot around different types of communication around test engineering. If there was one nugget that you guys have all had test initiatives that have either been hugely successful or have died a death and not been used by anyone, let's assume that both of those were valid engineering solutions, but one was communicated less well. What's the one nugget of information or guidance that you believe this room should take away from this and imprint in their minds and use every time they're pitching beyond their team or explaining the value of test beyond their team? I'll give you a couple of sentences each and then we'll finish.
I think it was actually what you guys said at the end is figure out what the person you're pitching to, what is their goals, and then tie it to that. I think that's all guaranteed in my mind to work.
Yeah, their goals and their problems. Show them how you're going to solve their problems. Don't be going to them saying, how are you going to solve my problem? I'm sure they get that enough. What you want to do is, I'm here to solve the problem for you.
Yeah, like showing the return of investment. So just show, yeah, this is my efforts towards you. So your effort towards me, the cash. So we're going to return this with better quality, less returns. So that was the point for me.
Yeah, I think for me, using what they're going to lose as an important thing, as well as using collaborative KPIs, not just your functions KPI, but also show how the other functions can leverage the value that you're creating, could get additional support for your pitch.
So if I was going to have one thing, you said it's collaboration. In the panel yesterday, someone said people don't tear down things that they help build. If you can find the people you need to work with and bring them on as part of your team, even little things like when you sit down in a meeting room, move the chairs so you're sitting, well, if you're not on Teams or Zoom, move the chairs so you're sitting next to them or catty corner from them and look at a laptop together rather than sitting on the other side of the table in an adversary fashion. Try and bring them onto your team. Generally, I found that being much more successful. And with that, I'll say thank you to Bala and Omid and Michael and Luis. And we'll be hanging around, so do come and ask further questions on anything we've had. And thank you so much for joining us today to talk about maybe a slightly non-traditional topic here at NI Connect, but I think a very important one. Thank you.